is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast.
The truth was, it wasn't really a very fun game. I mean, it was an interesting scientific exercise.
This is an interview episode of Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. Michael Crick created the game Frogmaster, which was published for the Atari computers by the Atari Program Exchange. It first appeared in the summer 1982 APX catalog, where it won first prize in the entertainment category. Michael later made a version of Frogmaster for the Commodore 64. He created two other C64 games, Break Street, a breakdancing game, and Go for the Gold, an Olympic-style game, as well as TERSE, a programming language for the C64. Frogmaster cost $22.95 and was APX catalog number 20131. A Spanish version of Frogmaster was also released by APX. Amansarranas was APX catalog number 20252, but Michael tells me he didn't create it, he doesn't know who did, and he didn't know it existed until I showed it to him. I'm going to read the catalog description from the APX catalog for Frogmaster. Frogmaster by Michael Crick. Recommended for ages 9 and up, written in BASIC and machine language. Here's a different and fascinating concept in computer instruction. On the surface, Frogmaster is a fast-moving, high-concentration competitive game for 1 to 4 players. Underneath, however, it's a dynamic exercise in learning how to use conditioning to train animals. Inside each frog or tadpole on the screen is a primitive brain entirely simulated by the computer. After Frogmaster automatically loads into computer memory, the players position themselves on the football pond. The object is to train your tadpoles to cross your opponent's goal line. The first to score 50 points wins. Left to themselves, the tadpoles dart around randomly, but when you reward them by pressing the joystick button, they learn to jump in the right direction. When rewarded, the tadpole will glow with pleasure, squeak with delight, and jump again in the same direction. Rewarding also modifies the dozen primitive brain cells controlling each tadpole's behavior. Your aim is to condition these brain cells to turn inept tadpoles into dedicated scorers. After playing some games, you can increase the challenge by adding walls to be penetrated and metamorphosis, where tadpoles turn into frogs that lay eggs and eat opposing players. Review comments. This is a good educational simulation as well as an enjoyable game. The metamorphosis option is particularly well done. To appreciate the game fully, read the manual, which provides an excellent explanation of both the game and the theory behind the program. Requires Atari Basic Language cartridge, 1 Atari joystick controller per player. Ordering information. It was available on diskette, required 24K of RAM, and cost $22.95. This interview took place February 3, 2016. I think the story of Frogmaster starts way before the Atari computer, so I'm interested in hearing kind of the prehistory of that. Do you want to start there?
Yeah. So I guess back when I was a teenager, we were not Christian, and so we celebrated Christmas along with everybody else, but we decided that Christmas trees maybe could be improved upon. So each year we would create a Christmas object. One year it was a 7-foot rocket. Another year it was a giraffe. And in the sort of final year, I decided that I would make something that moved. And I brought this along. Of course, you won't be able to see it, but I can describe it. I don't know if you can see this. This is a Ladybug. Has a power supply in this box. It's about 10 inches in diameter, and it has 2 fan motors inside and a lot of Meccano. It will actually reach a top speed of 5 miles an hour, which is a little bit frightening.
All right, so this was. I want to describe it. It was a fuzzy red and black ladybug about the size of a soccer ball, I'd say.
A little bit bigger.
Yeah, and
10 inches, actually.
So this is your Christmas ladybug?
This was our Christmas Ladybug.
Okay.
And it had a brain. I was interested in, robots and things, which consisted of, this was pre-transistor, you have to understand. It had 2 post office relays, which they're about 2.5 inches long. And, I guess they still have relays like that, but the entire telephone system was run by these, so they were fairly easy to get. It also had 6 micro switches, and the top part was actually separate from the bottom part, so that if it hit something, it would slide back. It could slide back perhaps almost an inch on springs. This was fairly important because if it hit things at 5 miles an hour, it would probably self-destruct if it wasn't very well sprung. But as it went back, it clicked up these micro switches, and they would cause either one or both of the electric motors to reverse, so that if it ran into a wall, if it went in at an angle, one would reverse and the Ladybug would rotate, so it was moving away. If it hit straight on, then both micro switches would be triggered, and then that would cause both motors to reverse. And then there was a random mechanism which caused them to go forward again, so you never quite knew where it was going to go. And in those days, batteries were not that small, so the whole thing, had a cable. So you can see is connected to it, and because of the way the switches were arranged, you could actually take it for a walk like a dog, because as soon as it got on the end of its leash, it would reverse and come back to you. So anyway, this was the original concept which fired up it all. Then I came over to the United States, and I was studying neurophysiology at Harvard Medical School, and not doing particularly well at it. But as a sort of a sideline, I decided, okay, well, let's make a more sophisticated brain for this Ladybug. And so I met a guy from MIT who was busy trying to invent a new programming language, which I guess still is around, mumps. So I helped him with mumps, and he gave me a yard of bench and a supply of transistors, which in those days you couldn't buy. So I made a whole series of circuit boards, which one of them, here we go, you can describe it.
It looks like a breadboard thing with a lot of wires and transistors and stuff on it.
Right. And in the middle is a capacitor, which is actually the memory.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then there were 9 of these, and then a sort of a master controller. And connected to the whole thing was a reinforcement button. Each one of these boards let you. It was designed to simulate operant conditioning. And I was very lucky enough to work with, my memory will go in a moment, Richard Herrnstein, who was the head of the psychology department at Harvard, thought it would be an interesting project. So he helped me get the equations right so that I could simulate operant conditioning fairly accurately. The operant conditioning is, what is used to train pigeons to peck things and do things like that. And the idea was to try and get a little machine that you could train to do different things. And I got to the point where I was just sort of getting to where I would be wiring it up when I left medical school and went to work at Boltgranic and Newman, which was a company in Cambridge, Massachusetts. That was, and I was in the group that was trying to develop what became the ARPANET. And actually, the internet has a very similar property to this device, because it every second sends out a pulse to all its neighbors and says, who am I and what am I connected to? So this concept that I had, which really came from looking at the brain, that things should be self-wiring, sort of transferred into this. And this device that you saw had the same 1 second pulse that the internet has always had. And so I don't know who copied who, but somehow we ended up in the same place. So I decided when I got there, I had this access to this PDP-1. It was actually the first machine that DEC ever shipped. It had 64K of memory, which was really exciting, all hand-wired. It was the size of a very large room. It was made of wood. And you could program it, and there was a little monitor that you could do things on. So I decided that I would create the equivalent of this Ladybug on the screen, and so which ended up just being a little blob. There was no color. It was just a half-inch blob that would move around the screen. And then I took the equations that I'd used to create the circuit board, and I made little nerve cells that could control whether the blob went slow or fast or left or right or whatever it was. And so you would sit there with a little button, and you would watch this blob. And if you wanted it to go fast to the right, you would sort of wait until it went fast to the right, and then you would reinforce it. And if it went slow to the left, you do nothing. And it was just straightforward operant conditioning, and it did actually work. There were some side things of that, which was that the person in the next office to me was trying to invent what turned out to be Logo. And he saw my little gadget running around the screen, and he said, oh, what we should do is, make it we should be able to program it in Lisp instead of having it trained. So, and Lisp isn't very manageable. So he got the idea that he could write a much simplified version of Lisp, which is what actually ended up being Logo.
This was Wally Fertzig?
Wally Fertzig, yes. Mm-hmm. And he was working with Seymour Papert, who took the credit for everything. And it's sort of interesting that this original Ladybug, Seymour Papert actually got somebody to manufacture it without my permission or knowledge. It had exactly the same, everything was the same. It was the same diameter. It operated the same way. It had it was just a copy of it. But he would never admit that he'd ever seen mine, although I did show it to him. Anyway, so
this guy sounds like okay, he's still alive. But it sounds like a real villain. I mean, he's stealing ideas from people left and right.
Well, I think there's something to that. I don't know. I have really much backup evidence, but he certainly took this idea from me and claimed it as his own. But that never bothered me very much. Okay, I was just sort of happy that the ideas were actually, copying is the most sincere form of flattery, right?
Right, that's true.
So roll forward to, I guess, around 1978, and I got my first Atari 800. And so I thought, well, what can I do with this? And, I learned Atari Basic, and it was fairly easy to, create a blob that would move around the screen. So then I decided, well, we can make this a bit fancier. Instead of having a blob, we could have frogs. So there were half a dozen frogs on the screen.
Tadpoles, really, right?
No, frogs.
Were they? Okay.
Frogs, yeah. And they could jump, and they could jump long jumps or short jumps, or they could jump left or right or backwards. Or they actually had 28 different of these nerve cells connected to them, and they were just wired up. They could have babies, they could lay eggs, you could train them to lay more eggs, and then there were cells that functioned in tadpoles. And the idea of the game was to get your frogs or tadpoles or whatever it was, the eggs didn't move, over to the left side of the screen, and the other player would try and get the same frogs with this, identical reinforcement button, but his timing would be different. He would try and get the frogs to go over the right side of the screen. When all the frogs got over to one side of the screen, then it was declared a win. And so we characterized it as football and sent it into I think it's the Atari Program Exchange. They had a quarterly competition. Mm-hmm. It won first prize and was presumably distributed to various people. And then I didn't know until you asked me about it, but apparently it was translated into Spanish, and so there was...
I looked at that this morning. I'm surprised you didn't know about it. That's very strange. I don't even know how to say it. It's Amansarranas, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Which is probably Frogmaster in Spanish. But
probably. Yeah. I would hope. Did Atari pay you royalties, I assume, based on Frogmaster?
No, I didn't get any royalties on that.
Really?
Well, it was a competition, and that
right.
was, and the truth was that it wasn't really a very fun game. I mean, it was an interesting scientific exercise, and it had lots of things going offshoots that were valuable. What did happen was that I showed it to Commodore. They were just coming out with a Commodore 64, and they said, "Can you convert this to the Commodore 64?"
Because they also wanted to have a not fun game, apparently.
Yeah, I don't know. They didn't understand these things either in those days, So I said, yeah, I would try my best, but there was this problem, and that was that the Atari Basic was 25K, and they wanted to put it on an 8K cartridge. And this would probably have defeated most people. But I had been studying Forth and what are now called P codes. So I created a 1-byte computer language which was called TERSE. And I had a Atari Basic to TERSE compiler. And when I put it through the compiler, it got down to 6K. Now, you also have to have a little interpretive module, and that was 1.5K. So then I had 7.5K, and I actually had 0.5K left to go and add improvements to it.
15.
So I sent it off to Commodore, and they didn't have much else to sell at that point. So they sold 35,000 of them, on which I did get pay royalties.
Wow.
So anyway, in some sense, I did get my money back. As it were.
Was it also called Frogmaster on the Commodore version?
Yes. Yes.
Did and you have no idea how well or how badly the Atari version sold, though?
No, I never got any numbers from them. So
that's weird. They usually paid royalties, and they would send out statements, and
I don't ever remember getting any, and I didn't worry about it. It was at that point I really wasn't trying to make money very much. I was just I had my job, and this was sort of something I did on weekends.
Right.
So, but anyway, this TERSE language then I used that went on to help create several successful games. I created a prototype called Homebuilder, and I went down and presented it to Maxis. They got very excited about it, and eventually it came out as The Sims. So that was another offshoot of all this activity. We also did a...
Now, I don't like to argue with the people that I'm interviewing, but Will Wright is generally credited as the creator of The Sims.
Oh, he absolutely is. I'm not doubting that at all, but I went down and gave a presentation to him and about 25 other people down at Maxis, and he got very excited, and I was invited to join the company and help him develop this code.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for practical reasons, I wasn't able to do that, but I think if you ask Will Wright, he will say, did Michael Crick have any influence on this? And I think it would be true to say that it's something that he might have thought of as sort of natural development or what he was doing. I think what I did was fill in the details and sort of legitimize it.
Giving it sort of the biological underpinnings of...
Yeah, I wrote a little demo. And I think... trying to remember what machine that was on. I think that was on an Amiga. And, after everybody saw the demo, they got all excited about it, spent the next 10 years, trying to get it into a product, during which time I was doing other things. But I sort of kicked it off. I still have the 7-page design document that shows what my input was, although the demo has been lost.
Love to see the design document if you have a scan of that or can make one.
I think I can probably email a copy of it to you.
I'd like to see that.
It's pretty crude, but
sure.
You can see by looking at some of the pictures that the Sims came from that.
And you told me at one point that there was also at one point a pet version of Frogmaster that was never released.
At one point Commodore asked me to do a pet version, and they told me when I finished it that they didn't intend to publish it. And there was a little story there because they said, we don't really want to pay you for it either, and we'll give you 2 days to have you think about that. And I told them that I didn't need 2 days. 2 seconds was quite enough, and that I had done the work according to the contract, and I had delivered it, and if you didn't want to publish it, that was not my problem. And they paid me. They used to try this on everybody, and if they hesitated, they probably wouldn't get paid.
Yeah, the Trammels were famous for that. They kept that up once they bought Atari, too.
Yes.
All right, so where do we go from there? You're working on Frogmaster and for various platforms, and you.
No, I'm currently working on another game I wrote called WordZap.
You're doing that today? Is this
doing that today? Yes, we have a brand new version up this morning.
Is this an app or an online thing or what?
It's now an online thing. It was originally an app. I wrote it in 1990. It was published in Microsoft Entertainment Pack 3. I've sold well over 1 million copies of it over the years. And there was a 2-player version until Microsoft deprecated Direct Play. It used Direct Play. It's taken me a decade to sort of come back and try and get it to the point where I can make it a 2-player version. But I decided to be a bit more ambitious, which is that rather than just have it play on Windows, now it will play on just about anything. Anything that runs HTML5, which is just about everything. Mm-hmm. And there's a new library for HTML5, which is called WebRTC, Web Real-Time Communications. And the indications are that I will be able to latch that on to the basic code. So instead of playing the computer, you will have the option of playing another player. And whether we'll get back to the point where, we used to have weekly competitions, there was a league, there were all sorts of committees that worried about how the game played. There were ladders, as many as 500 or 600 people playing each other at once on some of these sort of sites where people went to do that. Whether we'll get back to that in this, it's very competitive out there now. When I started out, things weren't so competitive. But anyway, I'm hoping that it will resume its former glory, and I want to turn it into an e-sport.
I don't know what that
is. Where you have national competitions and things like that. It's very suitable for that. It's very fast, and spectators can see what's going on better than the players sometimes, which is a good reason for having a sport that people watch. So I'm hoping that people have competitions, and that other people will be able to sort of tune in and watch them play, and maybe even win some money and things like that. So
I'd like to know a little bit more about this TERSE computer language you made. I can't find anything online about it, so it seems like it's not something that really saw wide use out of your lab.
No, we kept it very secret.
Yeah. So tell me more about it.
Well, each byte was an instruction, and it was worked like forth, if you're familiar with that. It just takes what's in the accumulator and applies the operation to it. And it was fairly readable if you knew how to do it, because plus meant add and minus meant subtract, and all the usual symbols. it ran very, very fast. I mean, I tuned this 1.5K of code to the point where it was absolutely incredibly fast, and there was no other way of getting milliseconds out of it. And it was actually quite interesting because somebody did a comparison of different compilers for the 6502, and they thought of putting in my code as a option. One of the things they evaluated, and normally interpreters are significantly slower than compilers, but apparently I was the fastest of the whole lot.
Nice.
Which I think says more about the compilers than it says about my code.
So does this exist anymore?
I doubt it. I mean, it was the days when you had to get things to run in 8K are long gone.
Right. Well, I know, but I mean, maybe you have it on floppy disk, or you have the source code, or
it's probably somewhere. Yes. So, but we wrote this Olympic simulation, Go for the Gold.
That was for the Commodore 64 as well.
That was for the Commodore 64, and that was all written in TERSE. And I printed it. I printed out 3 copies of it, one of which I gave to the local computer museum here. And it's pretty complete. Whether anybody could get it to run, I don't know. But
do you still have a copy of that?
What?
Of the source code?
Well, I have it on paper, yes.
Yeah, well, that's scannable. I'm always interested in scanning source code and things that don't exist anywhere else, and sharing them with the retro computing community.
First of all, it's for the Commodore 64, and secondly, it's a loose leaf. It's a 2-inch loose leaf folder, so there's a lot of paper.
Sure.
So.
And you also did a program called Break Street.
Break Street
for the Commodore
in TERSE, yes. That was a very fun game, and it still has a little bit of following, sort of cult following. And we had a very good artist who went down and watched breakdancers and made sketches, and then my partner, who is more into the sports side of things, went and helped put it all together, and then we had a very. The thing that really made it was the scoring system, which was no matter how long you played, you always seem to get better at it. And that turns out to be a key principle of designing good games. So, after 2 days, you would be going twice as fast as if you had been playing for 1 day, and then a week later you would be twice as fast again, and 3 weeks later you would be twice as fast again. There was this constant learning curve, and so you could play it for several weeks and keep getting better.
I'm looking at it. I'm not that familiar with this game because it's a Commodore thing. There's this guy doing these breakdancing moves, and he's standing out in the street, and there's like ne'er-do-wells watching him, and trash cans, and in the alleyway, and he's doing these spinning on his head, and this looks like a fun little game. Nice.
Yeah, and you used the joystick. You had 8 different directions in which you could make him do different things, and so the scoring principle was that you had to produce unique sequences. If you did the same move twice, you didn't score, but if you could do a different move, and so you had to sort of choreograph this long sequences of moves, and if you were good at planning these things, you could get your score up to way higher than you would ever believed was possible.
Is there any particular reason you didn't do other games for the Atari? Why is there no Break Street for my Atari?
I'm not really quite sure that I can answer that question. I started working very closely with Commodore, and that they were very good to us, and it was just I guess we just developed everything for the Commodore, and then went on doing stuff for the Commodore as long as the Commodore existed, and then we moved up to the Amiga. I didn't have any particular, anything against Atari or any problems with Atari. But the Commodore 64 was to me a better machine than the Atari 800. So, and I had the advantage of being able to get in on the ground floor, develop all sorts of utilities. We wrote a very nice graphics editor so that the artist could do this animation. And in those days, animation was much more complicated because you had so little space that instead of having frames at 30 frames a second, you would have variable length frames, because that way you could get more animation in the same amount of in the same number of bytes. So when he's moving fast, you have more frames, and when he's moving slowly, you have fewer frames. And so we wrote an editor that let you do that.
Okay, what haven't I asked you about those days that I should have?
I'm just trying to remember. I don't have any good angles on it that I don't think I've covered. As I say, for me, it was more an exercise, and I wasn't really trying to so much make money or make a popular game. I was just trying to do something that hadn't been done before that I could now do because of this new technology. And I, as I say, I've been studying neurophysiology, so that led me to do things that were relevant to neurophysiology and perhaps not so relevant to entertainment.
No one seems to have a copy of the manual for the Atari version of Frogmaster scanned online. Although, oddly, the Spanish version manual, it has been scanned. Do you have a copy of the Frogmaster manual?
I've been working with this Seattle Computer Museum, and basically at some point I pretty much gave them everything that I had.
Okay.
With the thought that they can figure out what posterity wants. They even have some earlier programs that I wrote on the Atari, which it was incredibly difficult to write because you could only communicate with the Atari at that point at 30 characters a second.
Right. But what else do you remember what else you wrote for the Atari?
That was pretty much it, this Frogmaster.
Oh, you said there were some earlier programs.
Oh, yeah, but they didn't do anything of any significance. They were just sort of little test programs. But they were. But then I learned Atari Basic and learned how to write things in Atari Basic, and sort of went on from there. So, it was a very nice machine, and I looked at it, learned a lot about how it worked, and I looked at the Atari 2600, which was an absolutely amazing machine considering how much it didn't have, and then I moved on to Commodore, and then Commodore 64, and then Amiga, and then I went to work for Microsoft and started working on Windows. So then I started writing games for Windows.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your time today.
Oh, it's a pleasure talking to you.
If you enjoyed these interviews and would like to contribute something, I encourage you instead to donate to one of our favorite organizations, the Internet Archive, at archive.org. The Internet Archive is a nonprofit digital library with the stated mission of universal access to all knowledge. They've done incredible things to preserve computer history, including hosting thousands of programs in an in-browser Atari emulator, creating the Wayback Machine, and offering full-page scans of countless Atari computer books and magazines. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate.